Hey guys, how's it going? Some of you probably know that in the Steam Workshop, you can't share configs properly yet, so I'm just going to go ahead and make a quick video on my configs. So I'm going to start off with quickly here. I use two gamepad binds, which is left bumper and Y. Most of you probably use next and previous weapon on the bumper binds, but I use a microphone with one of my bumpers. But this is just what I'm comfortable with. I used to play with the gamepad, and these are the default gamepad binds of it. It's nothing special, but the left bumper is just 3 and 4 together, so you just get your knife, cycle tacks back to your knife again. And Y is just primary and secondary together. You can probably just have primary as Y and then your secondary sort of as X. It doesn't really matter, but this can be handy over, next and previous. If you're about to throw a smoke and you suddenly get rushed, you can just pull out your primary without having to sort of select through all your weapons again. If you want to try out these gamepad legacy buttons and more, you got to go ahead and make sure that you enable the original sort of gamepad in the gamepad settings. You've got to unplug your Steam controller and then go into the controller options. It'll look something a bit like this, and you've got to make sure the controller is enabled to be able to use them. You might have to restart Counter-Strike as well. Okay, the next thing I'm quickly going to go to is WASD directional. I don't use the joystick. The joystick is very, very nice for casual. But actually, the joysticks, as some of you may know, there's like a little bit of a room for error when you go up or down or left or right. So you still sort of you can look or move in a parallel direction. But sometimes this room for error is a little bit too small, and when you do things like running smoke throws, you might screw them up, or doing a peeking, for example, you might end up running back into the wall and getting stuck. So yeah, having an 8-way directional movement just means you've got more room for error. It just makes it more reliable. Also, there's no sort of acceleration curvature, so you sort of move at full speed as soon as it's sort of the input of the stick. So you can sort of start a step much quicker and peak quicker as well. So that can make the difference of winning and losing a gunfight. So moving on to the one that you lot probably want to know the most, the gyro. So I have gyro always on. The sensitivity is like 10 taps up, or clicks, whatever you want to call it, from default. I use 1.2 in-game sense, so if you use 2.4, you will be 5 taps up, for example. Acceleration off. You always want acceleration off. You don't want acceleration on for first-person shooters. That's because of muscle memory. If you want to aim from point A to point B, and that's 10 degrees of your controller, you want that to be the same all the time, regardless of how quickly you've moved it or how slow you've moved it. It will always be the same. So it's much more reliable, and yeah, always keep it off. Everything else is pretty much default. Smoothing, I have on a quarter, 3/4, or full. Sometimes it depends on how I feel. If I feel like I can be quite precise that day, then I might sacrifice that little bit of instability for better responsiveness. So if you are playing casual, you're playing some matchmaking with your friends, personally I would say probably smoothing is probably a little bit more enjoyable. Last but not least, the touchpad. Sensitivity is 8 taps up from default, no acceleration, trackball on, low friction. I don't use haptic feedback or anything. Everything else is pretty much default, apart from I have minimum movement threshold maxed out, and the smoothing as well. This is just because you can put your thumb on the touchpad and it won't register the fine little movements. But make sure that obviously once you go beyond this threshold, you will sort of jump like this. So be aware of that, and note the higher the sensitivity, obviously this lower room for error, so this will become a lot more frequent. It's not too bad at sort of good spins, but obviously at lower spins and when you slow down on the rotation, you will get this stuttering, unfortunately, until they add an option like touch the right pad to enable minimum movement threshold. So when you swipe and your thumb's off the pad, it'll be lovely and smooth. And you won't get that sort of minute input when your thumb's actually on it, so that would be quite nice. But until then, that's probably the best you can do. But anyway, this my preference, so tweak it, change it, whatever you fancy, do what you like. Okay, guys, that's my config. If you want to ask anything, go ahead and just leave a comment.